name is Clarissa Valiquette. I am the head of customer experience and solutions here at Dial Global. And I'm joined by three phenomenal leaders who I'm delighted to welcome to the Dial Global virtual stage. They are Jonny Briggs, Diversity, Inclusion and Resourcing Director at Aviva, Lindsay Johnson, Senior Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Program Manager at Qualtrics, and Joe Portlock, Vice President, Diversity, Inclusion and Early Careers from LexisNexis Risk Solution. Welcome all. Our McKenzie Delis review 2021 has some incredible case studies on real action from many organizations across both the UK and the US. And today, you're going to hear from some of these leaders, our lovely panel, who were instrumental in driving change at their organization and really what their actions have delivered. And really, we hope that their examples will provide some food for thought on how you can take this leading practice back into your own business. So before we get into the detail, though, I would be great to learn a little bit more about each of you and why you are so passionate about diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Jonny, why don't we start with you?
Thank you. So I'm Jonny Briggs. I've been with Aviva for 6 years now, and prior to that, I was with Thomson Reuters, and I was with the company formerly known as Royal Bank of Scotland before that. In terms of my interest in D&I, I have to confess my background and my experience is very much talent acquisition. So I've led talent acquisition functions, which I do at Aviva. But 4 years ago, I was very fortunate to be asked to pick up DEI, which I've done and I've enjoyed. And I'm really looking forward to talking to you about one particular case study and trying to give you a bit of a flavour of some of the other things that we're doing here at Aviva.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jonny. Lindsay.
The infamous unmute.
There you are.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Johnson. My pronouns are she, her. And as I mentioned, or as Clarissa mentioned, I am the Senior DEI Program Manager at Qualtrics. I've been here about 3 years. And I think I'm incredibly passionate about this space. It's a space as an IO psychologist that I've researched and that I've studied in my past and former life as an academic. But I also think it comes from my own experience, right? And the experience of feeling less than valued or othered in some capacity. And so I also think from that experience, I believe we have a basic duty as human beings to make sure everyone feels valued and treated fairly and equitably. So that's why I'm so passionate about it. I'm happy to share more about the road that we've been on and the journey that we've been on at Qualtrics.
Amazing. Thank you, Lindsay. Joe.
Hi there. So I'm Joe Portlock. I'm the Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion and also lead early careers within our business. I've been doing this role for about 4 years now. I'm so passionate about it, I guess, for a number of reasons. Firstly, I completely agree with what Lindsay says. There have been times when I've felt empowered, authentic, and there are times when I felt I've held back and not been my true self. And equally, I feel it's our responsibility to make the workforce the right work culture for the future workforce and generations. And also, I love data, I love technology, I love innovation, and diversity and inclusion can be like the rocket fuel to your organization when you get it right.
Amazing. Yes, thank you. And thank you for sharing your passion on diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity. Let's move on now to each of your case studies, which featured in the McKenzie Delis review. Lindsay, why don't we start with you? Tell us a bit about the Qualtrics case study, what you did, why this was a priority in the first place, and what critical actions or changes have been driven through this work since. Oh, I think you're on mute again. 1 sec. There you are.
Got it right each time. But sure, happy to answer that question. So I'll start with where we began in 2020, and it's really the journey from 2024 that's the basis for our case study. And within our case study, we discuss and call out our commitment to being an anti-racist company. In 2020, we declared and codified an anti-racism policy targeted at systemic racism, a lot due to what was happening in the world around us, right? That was the impetus. And so this policy was a first for the company, a first for the business, and it really started us down this path of how do we deploy and embed this policy at scale, like across the broader organization, and how do we strive for inclusion and culture and behavior change. And I think from this came numerous things. The obvious is the build out of DEI as a function. We had our first lead of global head of DEI appointed. Our team and the investment, right, in our team and growing that team has been the biggest part of that, or the first step. And some things we did right away just to set sort of a baseline. We developed and implemented anti-racism training across the company, enabled all of our employees and resources to start individual action plans, personal DEI journeys. We also deployed our unconscious bias training, which has now been added to our onboarding and new hire orientation and is a regular part of our cadence and training rhythms. But I think those are kind of just baseline. But as we continue to grow on this journey and really wanting to lean into the lens of anti-racism and our commitment to DEI that honestly comes top down, right, from our CEO, we found ourselves still with many questions and considerations that we had to make. So if I think about diversity, the first of the three, we want to cultivate an environment that reflects the broader diversity in the world around us. So we have set 5-year goals and a plan of how we get there to really change the makeup of our organization. And we've done that not just at a top line level, but we've been very granular. We've looked at departments, at functions, we've looked at technical roles, we've looked at managers, we've looked at our leadership levels, and what that makeup looks like from a representation standpoint. But I think it's the proactive approach to know where we stand, right, from a demographics and an employee segments perspective, and really assessing the nuances within certain functions and considering things like intersectionality, right, where we have the data. And we leverage our own solution to do that, which I'll talk about in a minute. But it's also been a part of the diversity journey is not just our ability to collect data, but to disaggregate data we have, data we are missing, and to do this in ways, right, that makes sense from a governance perspective, but also helps us mobilize teams and organizations to really help us achieve, right, our representation goals. I think for equity, if I go to the second of the three, we've been primarily focused on identifying and removing systemic barriers. We've leaned in specifically and focused on assessing and closing a gender pay gap, right? But that's just one example. But we started and continue to audit and evaluate all of our talent management and people processes, which has really required this holistic view from recruitment to hiring to onboarding to growth and development. We've been keenly focused on the internal mobility of our employees, particularly underrepresented groups, BIPOC communities, women, and other of our communities. We've been focused on advancement, right, and making sure there are clear pathways to advance across roles and across functions. We've even revamped what we call our performance development feedback process. It's our performance review, but paying close attention to things like promotion rates and looking at that with a lens towards intersectionality and demographics and what that looks like, and sharing that publicly with the company, right, in our town halls, and getting transparent with our data and where we stand. And then I think from an inclusion standpoint, if I think about kind of this anti-racist sort of policy kind of spearheading everything that we've done to date, we really have been focused on not just how we treat and engage with each other, but how we cultivate spaces that are truly inclusive, and making sure that every employee has the opportunity to have the same experience, right, when it comes to inclusion at work. And I think it's at this point we understood that we needed to evolve our traditional measuring and mechanisms such as training and our former listening strategy, employee listening strategy, which were a great baseline, but we were not actively measuring inclusion at the time. So, and I think the adage is you can't see what you don't measure. And so as a result, we pivoted our entire measurement model, EX measurement model, or employee experience model, to a solution and a methodology that was developed and validated in-house by our team of IO psychologists, right? And using this methodology, we were able to see data on the inclusion experience that we just hadn't seen before. Disparate differences across employees when it comes to things like psychological safety, belonging, authenticity, particularly for marginalized and underrepresented groups. So we just were able to see things, right, in the nuances happening within certain functions and certain departments. It just made that more salient and something that we could, tangibly try to intervene on. And so I think from there and moving forward, we continue to consider how we grow competency, right, in this inclusion space and in this DEI space, particularly for people leaders, for managers. How do we equip them? So there's been like a learning and development approach to inclusion to date and going forward as well. So I think all of this comes from our commitment 2 years ago to anti-racism. And so it's the basis of our case study. And that's the journey. We have much more in front of us, but that's the high level view of some of the things that we've been working on and the things that we're continuing to focus on into the future.
It's such an amazing journey in such a short amount of time. And I love how it spans literally across everything the organization does. Mm-hmm. It's funny when you talk about the data and sort of always evolving, right? It's number one, the job is never done. Diversity and inclusion will, there will always be new things that we need to think about. But also from a data perspective, it is so tricky to get, lots of our members are always talking about how they can't, they don't know how to measure certain things. And I'm hopeful that if Qualtrics is taking a stab at it, then, if anybody can crack that nut, it will be you. So you'll have to come back and share with us what you've done on that front.
Absolutely. Appreciate that.
Joe, same question for you. What is your case study? Why was it so important? And what changes have come about since?
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to echo, this work is never done. It's always better to share. It's not a competitive sport. And, we're all looking to find the solution. So happy to share. So the case study we used was one of the first things I put in place when I started in the role, which was a leadership program for high potential women in our organization. I guess when you look at the blank sheet of paper that was my job description when I started, it kind of felt like gender felt like the best place to start in terms of representation. And I'm sure like most organizations, our representation, certainly at the most senior levels, is not where it needs to be. But there was also this hesitancy around, is a development program for women the correct thing to do? Because the fair challenge to that is always, well, is it the women or is it the culture? Why are people not getting promoted? And I think, and I would echo what Lindsay said, it's so complicated. It's bias, it's empowerment, it's psychological safety, it's how you do things, it's your culture. What we found to take the approach that felt right for us is, firstly, we did a lot of listening. So we didn't design any programs. We listened and we did invested in a lot of time around focus groups with these women and kind of asked them what they wanted and what would be a valuable use of their time. And we're on our third cohort. So I say that because the feedback every cohort is almost identical. So what we were told is it was something other than capability that was holding women back. There was a lack of connection and time to build relationships with senior leaders, which meant a natural sponsorship wasn't happening. Networking opportunities felt quite exclusionary because they tended to be outside of work. And that felt like the majority of our senior women have childcare and they felt that was an arena they didn't have access to. And I think most critically, people are saying that they weren't turning up as their authentic selves. They were either choosing to be quiet because they were one of very few, if not the only woman around the table, or they were trying to act in a way that wasn't authentic to them, typically trying to sort of be heard and use their voice and shout a bit louder to get heard. I'm sure we're all familiar with these typical gender biases. So we created a program that first really focused on coaching around authentic leadership. That felt comfortable to us. We have lots of work to do around D&I, but I think it's fair to say as we make those moves, you have a different experience if you're the only one in the room or if you're the one of few. We know you're less psychologically safe. You're more likely to experience imposter syndrome. So we delivered executive coaching to support that. We also created mentorship pairings within the group because our business is actually 9 brands within one, and those silos are quite hard to sort of break down. So creating those mentorship connections and those networks of women across the different businesses just really fueled that partnership and supporting each other and sharing ideas together. We put in place sponsorship pairings with our executive leaders to really get them to know our talent better. And as sponsorship was sort of naturally happening with some leaders, not typically with women and also women of colour. So we actually created those partnerships and told the executive, this is how you need to get to know your talent and effectively sponsor your talent. And sponsorship is different to mentorship. And we had to give some guidance because relationships could turn into mentorship type relationships, but really emphasize that sponsorship is talking up your talent. It's knowing your talent. It's advocating for your talent, because these are the things that help get people promoted and known within the business. And really also kind of making the senior leadership aware of why we're doing the program and the purpose of it, because it could be misinterpreted that it's sort of, I don't know, somehow treating women differently to men. It was absolutely not. It was there to help create that inclusive space and culture. And we encourage women to share their insights and learning as they went through the program. So there's a slight element of reverse mentorship in those sponsorship connections as well. I like numbers. So some of the numbers that we have. So we measure promotion rate, which for the first 2 cohorts was over 70%. We had to be careful to say it's not just about getting promoted, but we measure that. And for the 3rd cohort, it's 25%, but that only started last year. So that will take some time. We've retained nearly 90% of these women. And also, which is really interesting because this isn't the norm in our business. Of the ones that had got promoted, 25% of them moved to a completely different business area or function, which was quite a challenge for us because we are quite a siloed business. We also have a publicly disclosed inclusion goal around women in senior leadership. So we are tracking towards that. We're aiming to get to 30% by 2025. I would stress that's the top 150 in our population, and we're a technology business. That isn't that easy to achieve. I think there were some other consequences that we didn't or outcomes that we didn't quite realise would happen. So this has absolutely paved the way for our next programme we've launched this year around race and ethnicity, because some of the themes are very similar, some are not. So we're looking at that, but I think it helps set the way and how's the best way to deliver talent programmes. And also thinking about how we improve general mentorship and sponsorship awareness, because that's true for all diversity demographics in the business. It just so happened gender felt like the obvious place for us to start. That's my overview.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It sounds really comprehensive. And I've heard not that many other companies actually talking about a full sponsorship and development program. I like what you said at the beginning, because it's not necessarily development of the people. It's not a talent problem. It's how are they seen and heard and listened to at all stages of the career, especially at senior leadership level.
Absolutely. I always say there's no secret skill that everybody's missing, that you just have to say, here you go, if you only knew this. It's absolutely about authenticity and empowerment. And we know we are just exhausted when we're not ourselves, and it's not sustainable. And you see that sort of manifest its way in terms of retention, people not leaning into their careers, people quietly checking out, as the phrase goes. So it's really about kind of utilizing and really valuing our talent.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. And last but not least, Jonny, tell us about your case study. What drove the action and what impact has it had on the organization so far?
Of course, thanks, Clarissa. So I want to highlight something that our ability community drove. So we, like most organizations, have a number of employee resource groups, which we call communities. And this particular community is called Ability, which looks at physical and neurological conditions. And I should say that each of our communities has 2 of the group execs sponsoring it. The idea being that therefore you have every member of the group exec engaged in DE&I rather than just one representative on the group executive. And the beauty of that is it, of course, creates a bit of competition. And everybody knows that group executives like to be competitive with each other. So actually it's brilliant because it means that they spar for each other to make sure that their community is striving. The group wanted to chase for the Business Disability Forum accreditation. And there are certain criteria they needed to work through to try and make sure that we got there. So I'm just going to highlight some of the things that we then did as an organization to do that. The first thing they needed to do was to understand the different experiences of colleagues. And we wanted to collect the data, like everybody said. So we, again, like most organizations, ask all our colleagues to share their data across all the different characteristics. We got very well with ethnicity. Interestingly, ethnicity, we've got to 86% quite quickly. In the other characteristics, it's a lot lower. And that's one of the challenges we'd said in regard to ability to really push so we can better understand our colleagues. So they set out some of the initiatives they looked at were, first of all, having an accessibility champions group. So working with the comms team about understanding what more they could do to help everybody to be included. Now, of course, technology's helped us brilliantly. So things like live streams, are now the case, but we now ensure that there's transcripts and anything that goes out live has then subtitles that go with that. So people can use that. And that's come from what this group has done. An obvious thing, but every single office is accessible. We are over 325 years old, and I think some of our estate was here when we started. So you need to make sure you go through every part of your organisation to make sure that it's accessible. We introduced a workplace passport, which again, it's not unusual. Other organisations have that. That is something that's open to every colleague to then highlight whatever they need in terms of their requirements. And why that's really important is, if you have some of those requirements, it can be, and your line manager changes frequently, that can be a very anxious conversation you have to constantly have. But actually, the workplace passport gives you the kind of platform to have that conversation right at the beginning and make sure that you are accommodated in whatever way that is. We, as you may know, we're the largest insurer in the UK with presence in Ireland and Canada. We have got enormous contact centres where our customers are calling very often with extremely troubling situations. So we have a vulnerable customer team, and we took them to help them to understand how they can maybe help our customers, whether that just be empathy or understanding the challenges the customer will have, and make sure that they can ensure that they get the best service, whatever their circumstances. We have a university, and what we've put in that is we've got a new module to help leaders understand how they can work with anyone in their team who has any neurodiverse condition to again make sure that they can, small things, actually in some cases hot desking doesn't work, so what do they need to do and how can they accommodate their team in regard to that. Set up an anonymous mailbox to try and make sure that people have the right to be able to make any comment, and we also promoted our Speak Up, which is the kind of anonymous whistleblower, because that's important. It's for everything. It's not, I think people assume it's fraud. It's not. It's for colleague experience, and make sure that if they really want to call something out, that they have got the platform to allow them to do that. Some great things that's been mentioned in terms of intersectional. So our Pride community and our Ability community came together and had something about coming out. So whether it be sexual orientation or whether it be any form of condition, that they could come out and do that. And that's going to be taken forward to looking at social economic mobility as well. The result was we attained the Business Disability Forum. We actually got silver. We went for bronze. We got silver. We're delighted. And your follow-up question will be what's next at some point. And I'll obviously say that we want to strive to try and get gold, but there's a good bit of work to do to help us to get to there.
Amazing. Congratulations on silver, beating your own target. That's fantastic. And I love the idea of the joint initiative on coming out for the ability in your LGBTQ+ group. That's fantastic. I also really love you had some very easy things in there, what seem easier than trying to set up massive ERGs and things for those of us maybe who are just starting on the journey. But things like the anonymous mailbox is a really easy thing that anybody can set up in a day, essentially. Or the workplace passport, I think, is a really great example as well to to create that safe space. Essentially, it's really good.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Some really powerful case studies here with clear impacts for employees. Moving on, then, how do you sustain this? I mean, how do you keep going every day and drive more change, even build on it, essentially? Jo, why don't we go to you this time?
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, I was just smiling because it's like, how do you personally sometimes sustain these things as well? Because everybody who works in D&I is so passionate about the topic, but it takes a lot of personal energy as well to keep going. Look, I think we've talked about it already, but I mean, I'm a big believer in data. The most critical people you have to influence are CEOs, and most CEOs really like data, and it's the first question that they ask. So I always like to have good data available. We very much started with representation, but now we've got a bit smarter with our data, so we can actually look at some of our processes, how fair they are. For example, within the recruitment process, is it our hiring selection, or is it our initial screening that's causing us or need to have areas of improvement? We've got some publicly stated inclusion goals, so they're for 2025. That feels like the right approach, because I think if you annualize targets, sometimes you can drive the wrong behaviours, and we very much position that our goals and numbers are there as indicators that the work we're doing is the correct thing to be doing and it's having the desired impact, not that we need to look at the number and improve the number, because that just drives the wrong behaviours of people thinking they have to promote or hire based on somebody's demographics and diversity, which is not the case. Specifically with the program that we ran, the one thing that I think had a real impact is we put people through this year-long development program, but we actually created an alumni group, which we keep building every year as people complete this program. And actually, in a way, the value is almost greater in that alumni group because it gets bigger and bigger. And actually, there's more connections and sharing of expertise that happens within that group. So it was really critical to us that we didn't kind of say we're done at the end of the year. We kept that alumni group going. We build on it. We invest in it. In fact, we put as much money investing in the development of the alumni as we do in the program itself. And I think that's really helped improve the longevity of the program. And we also keep tracking how people are getting promoted, our retention rates, which are really positive, and ultimately align it to our inclusion goal of women in leadership and our goals around that. I also think it's always important to keep listening, and I think you can be humble in D&I and just ask people, because no one person represents everything, and you can always learn from others. And I think you have to be open to being challenged, keep listening, and humble enough to say we may not get it right every single time, but we're really committed to learn and keep moving forward. And I think in doing that, we've pivoted, we've shaped and adapted. In our second year, the pandemic happened, so we definitely had to pivot how we approach this. But I think that's all fine, and I don't think it's ever detracted from the quality of the programme.
Yes, that would have been a tricky pivot for sure. Great to hear about the alumni network, though. I mean, given how many women would, as it keeps growing, the sponsorships that will evolve from those interactions as well will be quite huge, I'm sure. Jonny, what is Aviva doing to continue momentum?
And just following on Jo's point, so we have a women leadership program. The alumni is a brilliant network, and actually it has become a brilliant talent network within our organization that has been doing, I think what's happened over the 200 years of the insurance industry that's advantageous men is brilliantly happening for women now. We've had it going for 5 years, so it's excellent. But in terms of where we go in regard to this, so as I said, gold, it's great having something to strive for, and it doesn't mean it's if we get gold, it's the end. It's just but that gives us something. We know we've got measures that we can do to go and get that. the sharing thing is really important. So having worked majority of my career in talent acquisition and then coming into DEI, it is a breath of fresh air in the fact that there is absolutely total sharing. Everybody's really happy to do that. And that happens really well internally as well. So if you went back 5 years ago, all we really had was a thriving Pride community and a women's network. And that therefore meant that a lot of the organisation just really didn't think that inclusion was for them. And actually, they weren't given the platform. Now, with all the communities, every individual should be able to join at least 3. And it is about them promoting to each other the work that they're doing so they can learn from each other. And there's just things like, someone says, well, they've got a workplace platform. Could we do something similar within our particular community? So it's about sharing. It's about then learning from each other and making sure we can all make those kind of marginal gains. We've got a lot of work to do in our data. So as I say, ethnicity in a fairly good pace allowed us to produce an ethnic pay gap, but actually could we do a disability pay gap? Not with the information we've currently got. We would need to get more data to help us to go and do that. So there's another push in a campaign that we call This Is Me, which is just around why all colleagues should put their data in for all characteristics, even though again they don't necessarily think that it's something that's for them. So it's important to really push so that we have got brilliant data to try and help us. We have an engagement survey, which was mentioned other organisations and most do. Last year, we did a big deep dive in a number of different areas. We did broad inclusion, we did gender, and we also did ethnicity. And one of the things that came out of that was that 20% of the organisations stated they either had a diagnosed or a non-diagnosed condition in regard to neurological or physical. So that told us that actually replicated the UK in terms of the UK population. But that wasn't something I would say that we had, we'd expected from the organisation. Half of that was mental health as well. So we've then undertaken from that a lot of wellbeing initiatives to make sure that we are there for colleagues. We're aware that COVID had different challenges for different people. So how have we reacted to that? Now that we're returning to the office, how are we returning to the office? So what sort of requirements are we making of people? We've got a fairly clear statement, but within that there is unquestionably an interpretation, and we need to make sure we get that right for individuals. So I suspect for most organisations that will be take a number of years to get to the place that is right for the organisation and for all colleagues, because that's something that's proving a bit more difficult and for very, very good reason. So we need to just keep an eye on that. But in the ability space, it is really important. We've got to take advantage of technology, and we've also got to make sure that others who aren't physically collaborating aren't either missing out, or some are receiving any advantage because of that. At the end of the year, we've got, for the first in-person all communities event, and that's just going to be absolutely brilliant. It brings everybody together. So we have a steer co-chairs. They're going to all come together. There'll be an element of a celebration, but it's really about, right, what can we learn from each other, from what initiatives we've been doing within all the different communities. So it's so important. The bit that we're trying to get across is everybody's going to have something they want to celebrate. We celebrate all successes, whatever community they come from. It's not a competition. And if somebody might receive some more significant accreditation this year, fine, that's great. Let's everybody celebrate and then push everybody else to see what they can do. So it's continuous improvement. It's constant. It's always changing. But it's great to come in something like this because you learn from other people and take things back.
Yeah. Exactly. That's what, and even listening to the three of you, you all have such different examples, and you're at such different points within your organization, what you're focusing on, which of course, every organization is going to be unique in the kinds of challenges that they face. But it really highlights for me for now that, the approach really needs to be customized, sort of the gender ethnicity piece is, from the review, we know is the top priority for almost all the companies that we spoke with, but then it's looking at the data and finding out where else you can prioritize, where else you can make subtraction and measure it, which is great. Customize it to you, like you said, and you didn't necessarily know that ability was the one you were going to focus on. Amazing. And Lindsay, how about you?
I love everything that's been said. I echo so much of the wonderful sentiment. I think for us, one of the big things and how we sustain is we put like inclusion and our goals around inclusion as our big bet, like our number one big bet. We call them big bets as a business. It's but it's on par, right, in terms of level of strategic importance as revenue, as sales. So I think that's a big signal from our executive team down that, this is important to us. I also think, some other things that we're doing to kind of sustain the work that we've started is really, I think I mentioned this briefly, investing in our managers and our people leaders and making sure that they have the right tools, the right resources, the capability, the competency to really create cultures and team norms and team practices and processes that are inclusive, right, within and for their teams. And I think it goes back to kind of my example of thinking about embedding and continuing to embed DEI and that lens towards anti-racism across the full life cycle, right, of employees and continuing to audit proactively in that capacity. I also think another opportunity area for us is accountability. So like, what are the mechanisms that will keep our entire employee base accountable to like the inclusive behaviors and the culture change that we're striving for and want to see? How are we thinking about accountability, particularly at the leadership level or at the executive level? Like, one way we've done that is address our leadership competency model to make sure that that competency model aligns to how we're defining inclusive leadership. We've invested in that competency building and that work. And so that is now a part of our leaders' competency model and how they'll be evaluated. But there are other ways that we probably don't have the full answers to in terms of accountability and how we really push for transformative culture change. So that's something that's top of mind for us. What does that look like in sustaining the work that we've done so far? I think as Joe and Jonny mentioned, data will continue to be a big part of what we're doing. We've wanted to take a data-informed approach to a lot of the actions and the initiatives that we've started and invested in. And so I think optimizing that for the future. How do we have and continue to have mobilization and agency around the data that we have? The publicly disclosed goals, as Joe mentioned, that we have around data and in our representation in our workforce as well. And I think it resonated, Jonny's point about kind of leaning in more to this full spectrum of diversity in all dimensions and intersections of that diversity and taking a global lens, right? I think that's a big opportunity area for us. I don't know that we fully vetted out, right, all of those different communities and those experiences and tapped into understanding that in very informative ways. So I think we'll continue to invest in learning and making sure that we're considering, again, just like the review points out, all dimensions of diversity and what that means for inclusion overall. I think those are kind of the big things that come to mind for me in terms of how we'll move forward.
That's great. And I love actually that you mentioned accountability and not just accountability. Obviously, how do you hold people accountable, but giving people, updating your competency model to give people real direction and exact, specifics on this is the behavior you need to display or, need not. So it's not just like, well, don't have any biases. Okay, well, that doesn't really help you, right? Like it's providing those real concrete examples is really good. While everybody loves data so much, I do have one more question, if I may. I know we only have 5 minutes left, but maybe we can get like 1 minute answers. If you had any advice for our listeners, how would you say you can increase the number of people who self-identify with certain characteristics that they are less likely to do so?
I'll jump in. I think for us, and I'll be quick, We've leveraged our ERGs and we call them Q groups, and tried to leverage them as strategic business partners to help us with the messaging and kind of the campaigns around wanting this data, why we want this data, how we're going to use it, how we're not going to use it, what it is going to serve, or the outcomes that we're seeking from the data. And I think there are nuances that our wonderful ERG leaders fully understand about their constituents that, I think our business has tried to tap into specifically and leverage that. That's been a part of it. There are many other stakeholders involved, of course, but that's one quick answer.
I would just add, so things that this work brilliantly. So we, and I'll happily call them out, we went to see the BBC, Channel 4 nationwide and said, right, what have you done? And they all shared what they'd done, and they created something called 10 Reasons Why. And you'll find it on our website. It's the 10 Reasons Why, which is just to say, so to make sure everyone can look at what are you going to do with that? Who's going to have access to it? So in Aviva, we've got 22,000 employees. 4 people can look at that data, and they can only look at it when it's aggregated. So it was important for people to understand, why we want it and what we're going to do with it and how it would be viewed. And that, I think, helped us to help people see what we were going to do with it. But more importantly, it then tells you how much they trust you. Because as the figures went up slowly, it was a case of, oh, right, this is not looking good. Because actually, to me, it's trust. So you've now opened your soul. Is somebody going to trust you in terms of that? So when we got to the kind of 86, genuinely ecstatic, because that means that people are, they're trusting. But it is interesting that we were now going down and looking at social economic, sexual orientation, faith, and all the other. We've not got as high. So we're asking ourselves around that, wait a minute, where's the trust here? Why are people not doing this? What are the barriers to that? So, as Lindsay said, we're working with the communities to help understand that. But of course, the communities don't cover the entire organization. So it means that we have to have the leaders saying we want this, and this is how we're going to use it. And they have to be able to see some tangible benefits from the data we've hired. So the ethnic pay gap is a brilliant example of, we wanted that information, we've now got it, and we now know the makeup of our organization. We've now got a leadership target for ethnically diverse colleagues on the back of what we know we've got. So I think you need to be able to say, if we do it, this is what we will do, rather than it's a vanity project that we're just going to collect information.
Yeah, well, I think you've both answered that really well. I'm struggling to think what I would add, but I completely agree. I think use it all as data. So if people don't give you their data, that is data, right? That's telling you something around how people feel within the organization. And we're quite early on our journey around, we have race data and age and gender, but we don't have disability, LGBTQ. That's the next phase we're looking at. But as we've been discussing it, the benefits of disclosing this data, because this is less visible, have to outweigh any perceived challenge or negativity around disclosing this data. So ultimately, you have to make it safe for people. So that's around your ERGs, providing that community, the psychological safety and inclusion in the culture, the action you will take once you get that data, the accessibility in the case of disability of your business, and how you treat and use that data. And I see it as quite a long project. I think you have to keep building. And I know Channel 4 was mentioned because they're a great example of a company that raised their self-ID of disability from 3% to 11%. They didn't change the workforce. They just encouraged and improved self-ID. So I think you've got to go on that journey and keep communicating the message and the intent and the why and what you're doing with that data.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, I think, wrapping all of this up, I guess, the biggest 3 things, I guess, maybe we want people to take away is listen to your employees, listen to the data, learn from it, prioritize from it, measure it, and evolve. Never stop evolving. So thank you very, very much for your time indeed on this panel. If you are live inside the summit, please look to the left of your screen for speed networking and our virtual booth during the ad break. And don't forget to tag Dial Global and use our social media handle #MovingTheDial. from an incredible panel, which is called How is the Chief Diversity Officer Role Driving Sustainable Change?